Hello, everybody, and welcome to our webinar series on respectful care and support for LGBTQ clients and colleagues. This session 1 is an introduction to LGBTQ culture and terminology, and I'm absolutely delighted to welcome you all today. My name is Heather McConnell, and I'm the Associate Director of the International Affairs and Best Practice Guidelines Center here at the Registered Nurses Association of Ontario, and I'm quite delighted to be here co-hosting this webinar with two representatives from the Rainbow Nursing Interest Group, who I'm going to introduce to you momentarily. I just want to go over a couple of logistics related to the webinar today. We do have over 450 people registered, so we're absolutely delighted to see the interest in this topic. We have individuals that have joined us from across the country, and we do appreciate your support and your interest in our work. This webinar is being recorded for future archiving, and we do anticipate that the files will be available on the RNAO website through the Rainbow Nursing Interest Group site as of early next week, and so we'll provide that link to you as it becomes available. I would like to say that if you do have any questions during the course of the webinar today, you can ask the questions through the session by typing in the chat box on the lower right-hand corner of the screen. If you can't see the chat box, you'll notice that in the upper right-hand corner of the screen there's a box that says chat. If you click on that, the chat box will open, and you'll be able to enter your questions and submit them to us. We will attempt to answer as many questions as we can during the webinar today, but we do have a full schedule. So if we aren't able to address all of the questions that you provide, we will collect all of the questions from the chat box and respond to them in writing and post those responses to the webinar, along with the webinar on the RNAO website. I'd like to thank a couple of the RNAO staff here who are supporting us today. Thank you to Melissa Aziz, who will be monitoring for comments and questions throughout the session today, and also to thank Tanya Prosta for her technical support that she's provided to us in preparing for today's session. So you're all here with us today, Part 1, January the 14th, for an introduction to LGBTQ culture and terminology. Part 2 of our session will be taking place February the 4th at the same time, reflecting on personal attitudes and values. The third session will be taking place February 25th, Every Space, a Positive Space, and our fourth and final session, March the 25th, more on supporting trans clients and colleagues. We have started receiving registration for the webinars Part 2 through 4, so please, if you're interested, don't hesitate to put your name forward on the registration list. The objectives for the overall webinar series include increased understanding of the historical oppression of LGBTQ people in Canada and its effects on health and wellness, a reflection on personal attitudes in order to create increased empathy and sensitivity towards LGBTQ people, and increased knowledge of LGBTQ culture and history, as well as inclusive language and terminology, increased clinical knowledge and skills for serving LGBTQ people, and increased knowledge about how to make healthcare setting a positive space. Now, for those of you that aren't members of the Registered Nurses Association or aren't familiar with our work, the RNAO is the professional association of registered nurses in Ontario, Canada, and we're the strong, credible voice leading the nursing profession to influence and promote healthy public policy and clinical excellence. We have well over 40,000 members and continuing to grow, and we're really finding that the focus on really supporting that, the nursing profession to influence and promote healthy public policy and clinical excellence. This work of the Rainbow Nursing Interest Group is really a very good example of advocacy in action, being able to move forward with a desire to share knowledge and information with the broader healthcare community, which is really what has brought us together here today. So I'd like to introduce to you our two facilitators who will actually be facilitating our upcoming sessions for us throughout the next 4 webinars. Diane Redding, her photo is on the left-hand side, and you'll see her shortly on the video. She's a founding member of RNAO's Rainbow Nursing Interest Group, and she served as the co-chair for 4 years. She was also active on the Public Health Alliance for LGBTQIQ Equity, a working group of the Ontario Public Health Association, and facilitating positive space training in various Ontario communities. 2 years ago, Diane retired from the region of Waterloo Public Health, where she participated on the Access and Equity Committee and Regional Municipality of Waterloo's Dialogue on Diversity, LGBT. So welcome to you, Diane. I'd also like to introduce to you Jean Clipsome. Jean has worked for 25 years as a public health nurse and nurse practitioner in HIV/AIDS and sexual health programs in both Peel and Halton regions. As part of her role, she advocated for supports and services for LGBTQ people and provided education around cultural competence and developing skills to make community health and social service organizations into positive spaces. This included chairing the Public Health Alliance for LGBTQIA Equity, a work group of the Ontario Public Health Alliance, and setting of the executive of the Rainbow Nursing Interest Group, which she has chaired for almost 3 years. She's also a founding member of the local LGBTQ organizations in Peel and Halton. So I would like to welcome both of these leaders, and I will turn things over now to Diane, who is going to start the content of the session.
Okay, so we've got the introduction here, and welcome to everyone from across Canada. And so we'll just move forward. Sorry, we're just... So RNEO, or the Rainbow Nursing Interest Group, was founded in 2007. And our vision is every space a positive space. And positive space is a term for environments that are celebrating people of all sexual orientations and gender identities. And our mission is to foster and advocate for nursing care and environments that support people of all sexual orientations and gender identities. Our goals are challenging the invisibility and silencing faced by LGBT people, to facilitate evidence-based nursing care that reflects the needs of LGBT clients, and to provide resources, support, and knowledge for registered nurses, their communities, and each other. And some of the things that RNAG has been active in over the past few years is supporting the Safe Schools Act, which dealt with the formation of gay-straight alliances in Ontario high schools, and Toby's Law, which added gender identity to the Ontario Human Rights Code. And we are currently looking for funding to develop a best practice guideline on respectful care and support for LGBTQ clients and colleagues. And for any of you who are not RNAG members, if you are an RNAO member, for $20 you can join and help us in this work. So we're going to start now with the first activity. You would have received instructions in an email about how to prepare a star for this activity. If you didn't receive that email, please just quickly draw a 5-pointed star on a piece of paper. On one point, write the name of a close friend. On another point, the name of a close family member. Third point, a community group you belong to. Fourth point, an ideal job. And fifth, your hopes and dreams for your future. And if you can participate in this activity, I think you will get a lot more out of the webinar. So, for the purposes of this activity, if you are born in January, February, or March, you have a red star. So please write that on your star. If you're born in April, May, or June, your star is blue. If you're born in July, August, or September, your star is green. And if you're born in October, November, or December, your star is yellow. So for this activity, all of you are LGBT, lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgender. You have known about your sexual orientation for some time, but you have kept that information secret until now. But starting today, you are going to come out and share that information with others. So let's find out what happens to you in your coming out process. And I would just make a comment that those of you who do identify as being LGBT may have more of an emotional response to this activity. So you have decided that it will be easiest to come out to your friends first. since they have always been there for you in the past and you trust them. If you have a blue star, your friend has no problem with your news. He or she thanks you for being honest and acts no differently towards you. Accepting you for who you are, do nothing with your star. If you have a red or a yellow star, your friend is hesitant and annoyed. You've waited so long to tell him or her, but you are confident that he or she will eventually accept you and understand that being LGBT is part of who you are. If you have a yellow or a red star, fold back the point of your star with your friend's name. If you have a green star, your news is met with anger and disgust. The friend who has always been at your side tells you that being LGBT is wrong and that he or she cannot associate with anyone like that. If you have a green star, please tear off the point with your friend's name and drop it to the ground. This friend is no longer part of your life. Most of you have had good luck with your friends, and you decide that your family probably deserves to know. You turn to your closest family member. If you have a blue star, you are embraced by this family member. He or she is proud that you have decided to come out and tells you that he or she will always be there to support you. Do nothing with your star. If you have a red star, the conversation does not go exactly as you had planned. Questions are asked as to how this could have happened, but following a long discussion, your family member becomes a bit more at ease with your news. Hold back the point of your star with the name of your family member. This person will be an ally, but only with time. If you have a yellow or green star, your family member rejects the thought of being related to a person who is LGBT. Much like some of your friends, your family member is disgusted. Some of you who have yellow or green stars are thrown out of your house and become part of the 20 to 40% of homeless youth who identify as LGBT. If you have a green or a yellow star, please tear off the point with your star with the name of your family member and drop it to the ground. Having told your friends and family, members of your community soon begin to become aware of your LGBT identity. If you have a red or a blue star, your LGBT identity is accepted by your community. Do nothing with your star. If you have a yellow star, you receive a mixed response. Some people in your community accept you. Some don't know what to think. You remain a part of the community, and with time, you will fit in as you once did. If you have a yellow star, please fold back the point with the name of the community group. If you have a green star, your community reacts with hatred. They tell you that someone like you does not belong in the community. Those who had supported you in times of need no longer speak to you or acknowledge you. If you have a green star, tear off the point with the name of the community group and drop it to the ground. You have heard that rumors are starting to circulate at work regarding your LGBT identity. In the past, you confronted these rumors, but in this instance, you do not have the chance. If you have a blue star, your coworkers begin to approach you and let you know that they have heard the rumors and that they do not care. They will support you. Your bosses react the same way, letting you know that you do good work, and that's all that matters. Do nothing with your star. If you have a red star, the atmosphere in your workplace becomes interesting. Everyone appears to think you are LGBT, even though you have not confirmed the rumors. Some people speak to you less than they did before, but nothing changes drastically. Do nothing with your star. If you have a green or a yellow star, you continue to work as though nothing is happening, ignoring the rumors that have spread throughout the workplace. One day, you come in to find that your workspace has been packed up. You are called into your boss's office, and she explains that you are being fired. When you ask why, she tells you that lately your work has been less than satisfactory, and that she has had to make some cutbacks in your area. If you have a green or yellow star, please tear off the point with the name of your ideal job and drop it to the ground. Now, your future lies ahead of you as an LGBT individual. Your hopes and dreams, your wishes for the perfect life. For some of you, these are all that remain. If you have a red, blue, or yellow star, these hopes and dreams will keep you going. Most of you have met with some sort of rejection since beginning your coming out process, but you have managed to continue to live a happy and healthy life. Your personal hopes and dreams become a reality. If you have a green star, you fall into despair. You have been met with rejection after rejection, and you find it impossible to accomplish your lifelong goals without the support of your family and friends. You become depressed, and with nowhere else to turn, many of you begin to use drugs and alcohol. Eventually, you feel that your life is no longer worth living. If you have a green star, please tear it up and drop the pieces. You are now part of the 40% of suicide victims who are LGBT identified. This activity, it's helpful if people can discuss their reaction to it, and we realize that that's not possible in a webinar series. But just take a moment to reflect on your reaction. If you are in this environment with some of your coworkers or other people, you might discuss these questions after the webinar. But, what are the long-term impacts of these losses for someone who is LGBT? What kind of support do you think they need, and where does the support come from? I would like to point out that all of the statistics in this activity are Canadian. This is the reality of LGBT people in Canada today. And I'm reminded of a conference that I was at in the early 90s on LGBT youth. And one of the participants there made a comment that has stuck with me all these years later. And they said that LGBT people are the only group of people who learn to hate themselves before they know that they belong to the group. And we're going to be talking more about homophobia, about heterosexism, when we deal with some of the definitions in the latter half of this webinar. I don't know, Melissa, are there any questions that have come in or yes? Okay.
I just want to say, this is Jean, that having done this activity many times, usually blue people are happy that they were blue and that their coming out process was fairly smooth. But often they talk about feeling guilty as well because they didn't have to go through some of the same losses that their colleagues did. And it's not unusual for people who have green star to actually shed tears. I've participated in this activity likely hundreds of times. I've never counted, but each time I do it, I still feel like I want to cry. So it's very emotional, and it really does, I think, demonstrate well what the losses are. I think, though, the one point I want to make about this activity is that each of us can be the point in somebody's star. And all it takes, as you can see with the yellow, all it takes is one point for someone to get through and start the process of coming out. Okay, we're going to move on to talking a bit more about LGBT culture and language. But before we do that, I just want you to know that you don't need to take notes for the rest of this activity. We're sending out handouts at the end of the webinar. And that is going to have definitions page for you, and also a sheet about what to do when someone comes out to you. And I also want to mention that all of the activities that we're going to be doing in this whole webinar series are on our Rainbow Nursing Interest Group website. And we produced this training manual many years ago, 2007, but the Coming Out Stars activity is in that, and it is also on the website if you're interested in following up with that.
And this manual is on your reference sheet that was emailed to you yesterday.
Okay, so we're going to get rid of the camera now. You don't need to see it for this part of the activity. Okay, so we're going to be talking now about respectful language. Language is really important. It's important to help people feel included. It's important because it can also exclude people and label people, debate and cause confusion. However, it can also validate. So an example of the validation was a youth that I worked with. This youth wasn't able to identify a gender or didn't feel that they identified with a gender. And the youth would say, some days I feel like a girl, some days I feel like a boy. And then the youth was struggling with this feeling. And at the youth groups that we were holding, we would often have guest speakers, and we had a speaker come and talk about gender. And the speaker used the word bigender, somebody who's both genders. And for this youth, it was like a light had opened up for them, and they felt as though, finally there was a term for them. They felt validated that, there are people like me. So terminology can be very empowering, but it can also be labeling. And an example of labeling, I worked in a sexual health clinic for many years. Over the course of the time, I saw lots of people who were married to somebody of the opposite sex and yet had sex with people of the same sex as well. It was not up to me to say to them, you are bisexual because you're having sex with both genders. It's not appropriate to label somebody. Oftentimes, those people would identify as heterosexual or straight. So people have to self-identify. And that's the important question as a healthcare provider that we need to ask someone is, how do you identify? And that really then lets them come up with the term. And the business about the language, too, is that it's constantly changing. And having done our workshops around the province, we found out that different terms mean different things in different parts of Ontario, and I'm sure that's true as well in terms of Canada, too. So we're just going to go through some definitions and terms, and if you have any questions, hopefully we can pick them up. Otherwise, we are going to be answering questions on our website. Every question that comes through will be answered in the next week or so. So this is a big and difficult and really important term to understand, sexual orientation. So it's how people identify sexually, and it's based on the gender of people to whom we are attracted emotionally and physically. So sexual orientation is about attraction. And it's attraction in an erotic sense, but also in an emotional and spiritual sense as well. And people often confuse sexual orientation with gender identity. So that's one of the purposes of this presentation, is to kind of sort it all out. So the next piece of this presentation is dealing with different sexual orientations. Sexual identity is how we present our sexual orientation to ourselves and to others. So again, how do we identify? This is an appropriate question to ask. Okay, so heterosexual is a sexual orientation. And that's a person who's attracted to people of the opposite sex. Assuming two genders, male and female. Okay, so homosexual is a medical term that isn't well liked. It was in the DSM manual for psychiatric illnesses, so it's not well liked within the LGBTQ community. But the definition is a person who's attracted emotionally, physically, erotically, and spiritually to the same gender. Okay. Gay male is a man who's attracted to other males. And this just talks about our comfort in society. Lesbian is a female who's attracted emotionally and sexually to other females. It's really important, again, to realize that people need to self-identify. I have a good friend who is a woman who's attracted to other women, but she doesn't like the term lesbian at all, and she would not identify herself that way. She prefers to be called a gay woman. So again, people have individual ideas of how they want to be identified.
And that came across too in the work I was doing with the AIDS program and in Waterloo region doing a workshop on safer sex for women who have sex with women. And because I used the term lesbian in the promotional information, and there were people I found out who didn't come because they thought lesbian was too political. So that's why when people working with sexual health clinics or with AIDS, we refer to, women who have sex with women or men who have sex with men, and that way you don't get into labels, you're addressing the behavior. Sorry, we're having a little problem there.
Technical problem there. Okay. I love this quote. Okay. So another sexual orientation is bisexual. Bisexual person is attracted to both males and females. There's a lot of mythology around bisexuality that we will be dealing with as we go through our 4 workshops. But one of them is that bisexuals can't be faithful because they're attracted to everybody. So, and again, that's a myth. A bisexual person would say that they're attracted to a person and not a gender. Okay, pansexual is a more recent term than bisexual, and that's the pansexual flag in the corner. It's someone who's attracted by all genders and all sexes. So a pansexual person would be attracted by male people, female people, trans people, intersex people, and so on. And even more so, pansexual people say we're attracted to a person and not to a gender. And again, not everybody understands pansexuality. They often have discrimination, similar to what bisexual people have. People often say to a bisexual, well, you're either gay or straight, you can't be both. Okay, here is an interesting, fairly newly, discovered or accepted sexual orientation, asexual. They use an H as their symbol because asexual starts with that sound. And in our community in Halton, we actually had a Pride and Education committee, and the asexual community got in touch with us and said, hey, we're a sexual orientation too. We want to be part of your organization. An asexual person is someone that has no sexual attraction to anyone or a low or absent interest in sexual activity. Now, there are actually a group of asexual people that use the Ace of Hearts as their designation, and that's because they want an emotional connection to somebody but not a physical or erotic relationship with someone. And we have no idea of the numbers of asexual people. It's very interesting. And asexuality is not staged. It's not celibacy. It's different from that. It has to do with a person's, attraction. We just have the Kinsey scale here. Kinsey was kind of the founder of human sexuality studies. He did research in the 40s and 50s looking at sexual orientation. He used mostly college students as a subject, so that was one of the weaknesses of his research. And there's many things to criticize about his research, but it's interesting as well just to have a look at it. So in Kinsey's research, he has a continuum or a scale with somebody who's 100% heterosexual on one side of the scale and someone who's 100% homosexual, as he called it, on the other side of the continuum. He found in his research, based on things such as dreams, behavior, attraction, and so on, that about 20% of the population is strictly heterosexual, only ever attracted to the opposite gender. we found that about 10% of the population is exclusively homosexual. That means the other 70% of the population is somewhere along the continuum, attracted to males or females to greater or lesser degrees. And again, one of the weaknesses of his scales is that he is only dealing with two genders as well. So his orientation grid and the variables that he looked at were things like sexual attraction and behavior and fantasies and so on. Now we know, as Diane had talked about earlier, that sexual orientation and sexual behavior are two different things. A really good example of that would be people in prison. People in prison frequently have sex with the same gender, but that would be because of the only gender that's available. So people who have choice in terms of their gender and their attraction, it's different than their actual behavior. So we don't go by behavior, and again, labeling people with a certain sexual orientation and so on can lead to problems and people not accepting that particular label.
And that's a continuum, so that just, because you're at one place at one point in your life on that continuum doesn't mean you're always going to be at that one place. People move along that continuum from, completely same-sex attraction to completely opposite sex attraction. Are we touching something that's...
And again, he used past, present, and ideal. Okay, so now we're going on to discuss the topic of gender. And gender identity and sexual orientation are really confusing, and people often mix them up, we find. So, of course, we start talking about gender from the moment of birth, maybe even nowadays before the moment of birth. Okay, we ask, is it a boy or is it a girl? So what is gender identity? It's in our brain, our gender, and it's a person has a deep sense of being either male or female, neither or both. So it's not to do with physical attributes. It has to do with who we feel we are in terms of maleness, femaleness, and so on. So it's not related to our sexual orientation. It's not related to who we have sex with. Gender role is characteristics attached to cultural notions of masculinity and femininity. Girls play with dolls and so on, which things are appropriate for males to do, which things are appropriate for females to do. That's our gender role. Gender dysphoria is a term that isn't liked by the trans community because it is a mental health diagnosis. It was in the DSM-4. But it's a diagnosis for someone who strongly feels they are not the gender they physically appear to be. We're going to spend a whole webcast talking about gender identity and trans issues and so on. We'll learn a lot more about this. But in Ontario, people have to have a diagnosis in order to have surgeries, for example, paid for through our healthcare system and so on. So there's some issues around gender dysphoria and whether people do need to have a mental illness in order to get help or support. Transgender, and that's their symbol. So transgender is sort of an umbrella term for some people, and it means a person whose gender identity differs from traditional gender roles. And it can differ in lots of different ways, as you'll see. So one would be a transsexual person. A transsexual person is someone who has had a lifelong conviction that he or she is of the opposite gender to that assigned at birth. So somebody who might have the genitalia of a male or a physical body of a male but truly believes that they are female. And again, we're going to spend a whole webcast on trans issues. Some pictures of some trans people here. So there are male to female, called MTF or M2F, trans people, trans women, and we have female to male, FTM or F2M, trans men. A cross-dresser is part of the trans community. It's someone who dresses up in clothing of the opposite sex, usually for erotic enjoyment. Apparently, the majority of cross-dressers, or many cross-dressers, are heterosexual men who, for example, will dress up in female underwear and so on. A drag queen or drag king, somebody who dresses up in clothing of the opposite sex for fun and entertainment. Okay, moving on to Two-Spirit. So Two-Spirit is a complicated term. It's an English word for a First Nations concept. And it's a person whose nature is comprised of both male and female spirits. And out of respect, we tend to apply it only to First Nations people. So, for example, in traditional First Nations culture, Two-Spirit women assumed the role of warrior, while Two-Spirit men were great weavers. They were considered the center of life, Two-Spirit men, and they're pictured in this picture between the men and the women. And the Two-Spirit people were revered by First Nations people. They embodied, again, the spirits of both male and female. They were often the shamans, or we used to call them when I was a child medicine men, but it was both male and female Two-Spirit people.
When Europeans arrived in North America, all of the native languages included a term for Two-Spirited people, Berdache, or each language had their own. And as the Europeans pushed their attitudes and values on the First Nations people, they learned very quickly that they weren't to use these words, and so they have fallen out of many of the languages, as well as the respect that Two-Spirited people had.
Right, and I mean, there's information that some First Nations cultures in North America had more than 3 genders. Apparently there was one people with up to 30 genders. It's really common for many cultures to have more than 2 genders. There are, for example, the ladyboys in Thai culture, the hijara in India and Pakistan. We would probably call them trans people here, who are often, for example, entertainers and so on in India. So it's very, very common to have a similar sort of gender identity in different cultures. Okay, another gender identity is intersex. And it's a person with mixed male and female genetic or physical sex characteristics. Just got a picture because we're all nurses of an intersex infant here, so it's unable to tell by the genitalia what gender that child is. Okay, I should go back because the politically incorrect term nowadays for that child was hermaphrodite, so some of you may know that term. Intersex people have been often had somebody choose the gender for them at birth, and it's often turned out to be the wrong gender. So more and more nowadays, the belief is that an intersex child needs to figure out their own gender and have surgeries or hormones or whatever to be the gender that they truly feel they are. Okay, the word queer. The word queer has a lot of connotations to it. For someone like me especially, I'm of a generation where queer was used as a slur against gay and lesbian people. And so for me, it's kind of a negative term. However, it is a word that's embraced by young people, and it's kind of an umbrella term for the LGBTQ community. So anyhow, we'll just look at the definition here. So it's a broad range of sexual and gender expressions, but it also shows how some words can be, some words can have meaning for different generations, for example. Some gay men I know of my age find this word very, very ugly because it was used to torment them and bully them when they were young. So again, we need to ask people to name themselves and label themselves and use the terminology that is comfortable for them. And young people love using this term. Also, I should mention that in academia, in universities now, queer has become a very common word. There are, for example, queer studies. So it is an academic term now.
It's also a term that is sometimes used instead of the alphabet soup that the LGBTQIAA, either queer might be used for that or rainbow community. So it can be more inclusive in that way.
Yeah. So genderqueer is somebody who has a very fluid sense of sexual orientation and gender identity. It's often used by youth who are exploring their sexual orientation and gender identity. This means somebody who is exploring, trying to figure out, moving between different sexual orientations and gender identities. Coming out, we had an activity about coming out. You probably know what it means. It's disclosure of one's sexual orientation or gender identity to oneself or to others. As you can see from the activity, it is not a one-time thing. Many young people who are thinking about coming out think, I only have to say it once and everybody will know, but that's not true. Coming out is a lifelong process. LGBT people need to scan the environment to see if it's safe to come out constantly.
And the first person you come out to is yourself. And that takes, I read a stat once years ago that it took 7 years for a person to be comfortable with their own sexual orientation, if they were gay or lesbian. So you can see that it's not something that is easily done, and coming out to themselves can take a long time. It's not something that is just they wake up one day and say, oh, this is how things are.
And coming out takes courage. So if somebody comes out, it's very important to thank them for telling you. It means they trusted you enough because, again, they're scanning the environment, looking for clues that would tell them that it's safe to talk to you, that you're someone who will accept them and respect them. So coming out is a really important and difficult thing to do, and if someone does come out to you, that means they've trusted you. It's a big compliment.
And in the third session, we're going to talk about those clues in the environment that LGBT people look for and how you can make your work environment safe.
Okay, homophobia. It's fear and hatred of same-sex attraction. Similar to homophobia, there's biphobia, which is fear and hatred of bisexual people. There's transphobia, fear and hatred of trans people. So there's lots of different kinds of phobias. And by learning about the lives and cultures of LGBTQ people, reading them and talking to them, that's the way that we overcome these phobias. So, what do these couples have in common? If you said they're heterosexual, you're right. So heterosexism is the assumption that heterosexuality is the only normal sexuality. And so it's something that our society does all the time and that we do all the time. If you look at things like forms that people need to fill out, quite often when you take your child to school, they ask or they used to, mother and father. And it's an assumption that we all make. When we meet someone, we assume they're heterosexual. So it's a huge part of our society. And so one of the important parts of some of the training that we do is to try to realize that not everybody is heterosexual.
So changing those forms to parent 1 and parent 2 is a good start.
Mm-hmm. That's something coming up at me. We lost it.
Okay.
We'll just hold on a minute until we get the rest of it. Great. Thank you. Sorry about that. No? Goes back to that.
Go to the next one.
We'll go down to the next one. All right. Sorry, we have technical problems here. Okay. Great. Okay. Ally. So an ally is somebody who is not a member of a specific group but supports that group, challenges discrimination and oppression of that group, and explores his or her own biases. Allies are really important in the LGBTQ community. And again, we're going to talk about a lot more about being an ally in our third webcast. Okay, so I want to spend a little bit of time talking about why we've been saying LGBTQ, or whether we should mention all of the sexual orientations and gender identities. So LGBTQIAA stands for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transsexual, two-spirited, transgender, intersex, queer, questioning, asexual, and ally. So those are the members of the LGBTQ community that we talk about. Many people have long debates about what to use. The alphabet that Diane mentioned is really unwieldy, but members of some of the communities would say, well, you're making us invisible by not mentioning us. So if we're two-spirit or intersex, how do we fit into, your LGBTQ? More and more, though, in academia, and because of the size of the alphabet, people are using the LGBTQ because trans and queer are both words that are umbrella words, transgender especially. And so that is what we use kind of as a short form, but we are talking about all the members of the community.
Sorry, technical problems again. So we have some time for questions. Just this is one back. Oh, no, that was it. Sorry. Thought we had another one in there, but we don't. So we've learned about the losses and stresses involved with coming out and discussed appropriate and inclusive language. And the next webcast, we're going to be reflecting on our own beliefs. And I've just been handed some questions, so let's just have a look at those. please expand on the difference between bisexuality and pansexuality.
Bisexuality involves two genders, male and female, so people who are attracted to both males and females. Pansexuality involves being attracted to all genders, so people who are pansexual are attracted to intersex people, trans people, males, females, queer, bigender. They're attracted to every gender. And so it's a fairly recent terminology that people have been using probably for about 10 or 15 years, rather than bisexuality has been around for a lot longer. And they, again, pansexual people would say we're attracted to a person, we're not attracted to a specific gender. We fall in love with a person.
Another question, is it appropriate to ask others what pronouns they wish you to use, or do you wait until they bring it up? Definitely, if someone has indicated that they are trans, or that is appropriate to ask what pronouns they wish you to use. They would rather you did that than use a pronoun that they don't identify with. And some people don't identify with she or her or he or him, okay? So that they tend to use a more gender neutral a pronoun. Some people even just like they or them with a singular connotation. So that you might see this in, I know I tried at work to use this, they or them with the singular, and it doesn't always go over so well, especially if you've got those English stuff. But definitely asking people is okay.
And in fact, it's more than okay. There's quite a few groups that we work with where we will go around the table before we start a meeting and just mention what gender we want to identify with, as long as we're, as we introduce ourselves, we'll talk about the gender that we want to be known as. And that's very respectful for people who are, for example, trans people. Okay. We have a third question about an alternative definition of two-spirit. A two-spirit person is somebody that channels both male and female attributes, or feels like they're both male and female. I mentioned the young person who was identified with the word bigender. That would be a similar kind of concept. But two-spirit is a concept that was part of First Nations culture. And so when we use that particular term, two-spirit, we're referring to somebody who identifies as First Nations as well.
Okay, another question. What can I do to make my workplace more accepting of LGBTQ patients and families? The short answer is tune in on our third session. But visual cues, okay? So if you have pictures or posters in your waiting areas, do they reflect diversity in terms of families and patients? I will say this right now, we will address it more, but putting a rainbow flag on your front door is not advised unless all of your staff are trained in how to deal with issues around sexuality or sexual orientation and gender identity. If an LGBT person sees a rainbow flag, they think, this is a place where I'm safe. And if all of your staff have not been trained, and that training is ongoing, that is not necessarily so. So you're going to run into problems of people who don't react in the appropriate way. If you can't come to the third session, going to our manual, the Positive Space is a Healthy Place, outlines a variety of things. But in the 6 minutes we have left, that's all I'm going to say now. We have a couple more questions.
Right, but I just wanted to throw in that a lot of the research and all the recommendations from any paper that you read about LGBTQ health mention staff training. So staff training is where you start. And that's the purpose of doing these webcasts, is to start training some people. Our manual has a train-the-trainer model, so somebody who's had some training can take up the manual and work with their colleagues.
Okay, why do some people use the pronouns we or them instead of he or she? I think we've addressed that. I hope.
We do out of respect for people who don't want to be addressed, don't consider themselves to be male or female, or have identified their gender as being something different from the pronouns he or she. So again, it has to do with people deciding for themselves how they want to be called. So when I talked about the bi-gendered youth, I tried to refer to them as they or them, because that youth some days feels like a girl and some days feels like a boy. Well, I don't know how that youth feels today. So I don't feel comfortable using that particular pronoun about that youth.
Another question that says, you mentioned the concept of using parent 1 and parent 2. Does your group also provide guidance on polyfamilies and how to provide them safe spaces? I think this is an illustration of even we get it wrong sometimes. We're all learning, but polyfamilies would be families where there's more than 2 parents. Am I correct in that, Jean? Yeah. So definitely it's not something that we have addressed up to this point, but it certainly is something that we can.
So we would advocate then on school forms to have, more than 2 options for parents. For sure. So we have another question about the reasons the medical community provides for characterizing gender dysphoria as a mental illness. I don't know, I can't really speak to the reason, but it's unfortunate that here in Ontario people do have to be diagnosed with a mental illness to get their surgery covered by our healthcare system. So it has to do with some of the barriers that have been put up by the healthcare system for trans people. The next question is, what does the term gender fluid mean? Gender fluid, again, might be that bi-gendered youth I talked about, somebody who goes back and forth between genders or across genders. It could be something that happens on a day-to-day basis. It could be something that happens over the course of a lifetime. So someone might identify as female right now and then identify as male later on in their life, or identify as trans later on in their life. So it just means that there's the opportunity or possibility of moving between genders.
When is it ever appropriate to ask someone their gender or sexuality? Okay. If you are doing a sexual history and it relates to the issue that is being presented, you can ask whether their sexual partners are male or female or both or neither. You can ask whether they identify as male or female or both or neither. So you're not saying, are you queer, are you gay, are you straight, are you trans? You're addressing it in a more sensitive way.
And when we get to the third webcast, we'll be talking about, what options you should have on your intake forms regarding gender. Instead of having male-female as an option, you should be providing options like trans or intersex or other for people to write in their gender.
And we just have one last question that we've got so far, and then our time is finished. But the difference between transgender and transsexual. So transgender is the umbrella term. Transsexual is someone who has had surgery or is considering surgery.
Right, but some people in the communities don't like one term or the other applied to them. So that is why we now talk about trans people a lot and leave out the sexual or gender part of it, because people, again, want to self-identify, and there's been big debate within the trans community about what term to use.
Well, I would like to thank both Diane and Jean for joining us today. What a wonderful session. Phenomenal questions. I'm just delighted that we were able to get so many addressed during the time that we had together today. For those of you that may have submitted a question that we didn't get to respond to, as we said earlier, we will pull all of those questions and respond in writing to those by posting them on the RNAO website at the Rainbow Nursing Interest Group's website. Just a reminder that our next webinar is taking place February the 4th from 12 to 1, reflecting on personal attitudes and values, and I do hope many of you will be able to join us at that time. If you have colleagues who you think might benefit from this webinar series who weren't able to join today, please do encourage them to listen to this webinar that we will be posting the archived version early next week so that they can have that background information before they join us on February the 4th. And again, I would really like to thank both Diane and Jean for joining us today. Thank you so much, and thank you to all of you for joining us and staying with us through this session today. Have a good afternoon. Bye for now.